guys get to work with a lot of players. We're going to talk some information about what you see maybe in their physical games. And ultimately, you don't see the same player doing a lot of the same things. You have to work a lot with what they bring to your programs. So let's talk a little bit about the physical game to start out with. What do you guys see as something initially that you want to try to keep players from always doing the same that you need to adjust with your players' games today?
One of the things that I think the bowling coaching industry has kind of taken a hold of and kind of, unfortunately, I think tried to fit everybody into the same mold is, shoulder rotation, the amount of it. What I tend to see lots of times, especially with a lot of college players, especially on the female side, is the overuse of shoulders. I really think the shoulder rotation wants to be dictated by how powerful you are as a player. If you have a higher rev rate with a little less ball speed and your angles are going to be a little steeper through the front, you need to have more of that swimmer type motion as you're going into the foul line, because your shoulders, you don't want them to be very closed when they get to the foul line, because you're going to be projecting the ball out to the gutter. But conversely, for the straighter type players or the female athletes, we tend to see them have lower rev rates, not as much angle through the front part of the lane, much more shallower launch angles. And because of that, I don't think the swimmer motion necessarily is the best way for them to approach their game.
Okay, in reference to shoulder rotation, what do we see from the ladies mostly? You get to work with a lot of the players and you see some specific things. What are you looking for? What are you seeing in their shoulders?
Yeah, when we see a lot of females that have a lower rev rate that need their angles to be a little straighter through the front, and they have a lot of over-rotating in the shoulders, the problem with that is it makes their room for air at the point of release really, really small. If they're opening their shoulders, typically the ball's kind of wrapping around their body a little bit, and therefore if they let go of it a little early, it wants to shoot to the right, and then if they hold on to it a little longer, they shut down really hard with their shoulders and kind of come over the top of it and pull it. So it really will help with the straighter arm swing, along with kind of keeping it simple.
So ultimately, when we talk about these tips and drills, you're going to give us some good ideas of what to look for, kind of how to maybe adjust that, and hopefully everybody that gets a chance to look at this will get to see maybe where they fit in those categories and improve their game as well. So let's take a look at some information from these two great coaches on how to take the physical game and those shoulder rotations and increase your average. Okay, Coach, here we have Shannon as our example. Tell us what you see with the shoulder rotation.
Well, Shannon being, more of the higher rev type player on the female side, but still overall with today's modern game, her rev rate's just a tad below 300 RPMs, around 288. So because of that, her launch angles are generally going to be more shallow. So you can see the amount of shoulder rotation that she uses throughout her approach is minimal. What this allows her to do is keep a stable upper body and not feel like there has to be a lot of twisting or turning to keep the ball back on line.
So with her opposite arm, she doesn't have to really close it down a lot and keep her angles really straight. She gets a little bit of openness so she can actually keep it in a better position.
Yeah, which in the grand scheme of things should 100% help her repeatability and her ability to repeat that same shot over and over.
Okay, great. Now let's take a look at our other example, Steven here. Let's take a look at his shoulder rotation. What do you see?
Yeah, Steven is much more of the modern type power player type game. His rev rate's about 425 RPMs. So because of that, most times, on most conditions, he's going to want to create a steeper angle through the front, hook the ball a little bit more, and because of that, he's not going to want his shoulders to be so closed in the finish position. So he needs to get the opposite arm out in front of him a little bit more and allow that ball just to kind of fall down and just keep those shoulders a little bit more open at the point of release so the ball can project to the right that much easier.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, high rev rate, definitely more angles to the front part of the lane, so keep that opposite arm controlling a little bit of where those shoulders go initially, keeping them from closing down too much at the finish position, ultimately giving him what matches his ball speed and rev rate. Okay, so now our reference coach is going to be side by side. We're going to put them next to each other, and what do we see?
Well, as you can see, there's a pretty drastic difference in the amount of shoulder rotation. So just getting back to what we were talking about, for these type of players, the type of players they are, it really fits their game. What we don't want to see is the opposite of this. So if Steven being the power player, to have Shannon's shoulder rotation, and for Shannon to have Steven's shoulder rotation. We don't want to kind of just take their opposite arms and switch them on their bodies. How they have it is the reason why they're as competitive and as great of players as they are.
So you find yourself correcting this quite a bit when you see players coming into either your program or just in general showing up with either one of these liabilities, and then you try to get them closer to what we're seeing here, right?
Yeah, it just seems like with, it's maybe a one-size-fits-all type mentality at some points. Everybody has the new it thing that they teach in bowling, and it seems like that over-rotation, that more swimmer's motion was really the it thing in coaching, and they were coaching every single player that same way, regardless of how they attacked the lane and what their natural launch angles were going to be. So I think that's the biggest thing to take, is that, you know, it doesn't mean that every straight player is going to be 100% square as they are walking through their approach, and that every power player is going to be really open with that balance arm facing the pins. You're going to find, you know, outliers in each way, but for the most part, if we can stabilize the shoulders for the stable players, have them be a little more closed and not use that big swimmer motion, and for the power players, that swimmer motion is perfectly fine, because like we mentioned, we want to keep those shoulders in a more open position. So let's take a couple of the major players that people at home have heard of. You know, take a player like Tommy Jones, big power player. Basically, I'd consider him, you know, he was the almost inventor of the modern style. He was one of the first generations coming up through the ranks that really had that modern, powerful game. And Tommy, if you look at his balance arm, it's way out in front of him, his shoulders get in an open position, and that allows him to not have to close them so drastically, because he's going to generally be hooking the ball a little bit more than, let's say, someone like a Liz Johnson, you know, elected into the Hall of Fame, obviously one of the best women players ever. She's more straighter through the front. She's not going to want to have that massive over-rotation of the shoulders.
Once again, two great examples of high-performance, really elite players that are going to give exactly what you're describing as that proper shoulder rotation. It's going to match where they like to play on the lane. It's going to match what their hand and their ball speed and their rev rate look like, ultimately giving them their elite performance day in and day out.
Okay, so here we're going to have Shannon demonstrate to us what some of that over-rotation of the shoulders looks like. So Shannon, give me a practice swing really quick of what that may look like. So really keeping the left arm way out in front, almost pointing at the head pin down the lane. So Shannon's a player who generally likes to keep her launch angles a little bit shallower through the front, not as much of a, you know, the big hook type player that really creates a lot of steep angles through the front part of the lane. So that over rotation of the shoulder is going to be something that probably in the long run isn't going to best suit the type of player she is. So a simple drill that you can do with your coach at home is have him get in a one-step sort of position here, about a couple feet from the foul line, so Shannon's in that position. And what you want the coach to do is just kind of grab by the wrists and take a practice swing. So instead of having that go so far out in front, just kind of bring it to the position that you feel comfortable. Now this doesn't have to be completely 90 degrees by the side, something that comes all the way like that. It's just really going to determine on the type of player that person is. If they're a big power type player, yeah, that arm can stay a little bit more out in front. If they're more of the straighter player who likes shallower launch angles, we want to see that arm close down a little bit, just so that we're keeping it the simplest as possible. The shoulders start to rotate too much, it can just add lots of problems to the player's game. So Shannon, let's show him what a good one-step drill would look like. Okay, so that's what a one-step drill will look like. Now we'll go to the full approach, and there's a few different ways you can do this. You can have your coach hold you by the wrist as well and try and keep you in the position that they see best suited for you, or we can have a little prop here, a little noodle that you can find at your local store, and just, if you're worried about sort of walking alongside, and just keep the noodle or something, a stick or what have you, that can keep that position of the arm not really closed or not really too far open. You know, it's just a feeling out process. Not every player is going to be in the exact same position, but we just want to see if there's major inconsistencies with a very straight player who likes to get really in that open position, or conversely, a very powerful player that really likes to stay in too closed a position. So we really want this arm to dictate and have this arm be the dictator of roughly what type of player they are.